He cares about you.
Hallelujah. Thank God. Let's say it. Cast your cares upon Him because He cares for you. I want to tell you a story about someone you remember, Daniel. He was taken from the land of Israel into captivity into Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar and then Belshazzar. And then the kingdom of Babylon fell to Persia. And in one night today, Darius, over the Medes and Persians, became the king. He heard the story and the accounts about Daniel's leadership, about his ability, and where he'd already been placed over the kingdom. And Darius put him as one of his top 3 people in the empire. And he planned to put him as number 1. Just like Joseph was beside Pharaoh, Darius planned to put him right there. And he was thinking on it. Word got out to the other leaders there. And they're realizing this Jewish guy is about to be over us. And they said, we got to get rid of him. And in their jealousy and envy, they were thinking, how could we get rid of him? What can we find that he's done wrong to get him out of here? Well, they couldn't think of anything. And then they realized the only way we're going to get him is with his worship of God. And so they came up with this idea. Let's go to the king and tell the king to make a decree that no one can pray to any god or any person except him, the king, for 30 days. And if they do, they'll be thrown into the lion's den. Well, the king, he had a lot of ego. He read that. Yeah, that's right. And he stamped it with the law of the Medes and Persians, which couldn't be changed according to their way of practice and principles they had back then. And that decree went out throughout the kingdom. Well, when Daniel heard it, he went to his house, threw the windows open, and knelt down and prayed where everybody could see, just like he always did, 3 times that day. Well, those guys were watching. They knew what he did. And they came back and reported it to the king that Daniel had violated his law. Now, it hit the king's heart because he loved Daniel. God had already attached his heart to him in a very short time. The favor of God. Imagine, from one king to another king, and this 3rd king he was under. And he didn't want to throw him in the lion's den, so all day he sought a way to get him out of it. But finally, the pressure from these guys, and he had to keep his word, the law of the Medes and Persians, so he had him thrown in the lion's den. But that night he fasted. The next morning he got up early, and he went down to the lion's den and said, "Oh, Daniel, was your God able to deliver you?" "Oh, king, live forever. God sent his angel and shut the mouth of the lions." So he brought him up, and I want you to hear the decree that the king made, because something happened in this time frame. You may not remember the rest of the story. Daniel took the men who had set up that law, the law that would kill Daniel. The king took all those men, their wives and their children, and he threw them in the lion's den. And then he made a decree that was to be sent throughout all of his provinces. In Daniel 6, verse 25, King Darius wrote, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth." So in that day, this was the world empire, like Egypt was, like Rome was at one time. At this time, it was Persia, present-day Iran, and present-day Iraq. But the kingdom extended at that time from India all the way into Africa, Ethiopia, all across the Middle East, and as well as Africa and part of Asia. He said, "I make a decree," verse 26, "that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel." Now remember, he just threw that whole bunch in the lion's den. You know that bunch is fearing all over. But here's the powerful statement this godless king made, because now he's no longer godless. He declares the God of Daniel, he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which will not be destroyed. His dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers, he rescues, he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. God's going to use your victory for somebody to tell somebody else how great is your God. He's awesome. Folks, you can count on it. You will see Darius in heaven. He made a declaration. He declared who God is. He released his faith, and that document went all through his kingdom from one end to the other, declaring who the real God is. I want to say it's important for you to get through what you're going through. When we went into the Dominican Republic, I want to share the story with you. A few months ago, I was notified of what was going on in San Francisco, Dominican Republic, that communists had targeted, and they were holding what they call strikes, what we would call riots. They were setting up blockades in the streets, burning tires, street battles, gun battles with the police. They were kidnapping people. There were people being killed, and it was the most violent city in the Dominican Republic. This was just a few months ago. And I was just being notified, Pastor, we just wanted you to know this is what's going on in the city you scheduled the crusade in. Well, as I prayed, it came to me, you know, these are the people that they need help. They need encouragement. We're going to go, and we're going to believe God. Well, the strikes are off and on, or these riots, attacks that are planned by the communists. You understand that there's a communist, anti-American sentiment in much of Central and South America. It's headquartered in Cuba. It's anchored also in Venezuela, Bolivia. A lot of the unrest in Mexico is stirred up by this group. It's backed by Iran. And there's a coalition in all these governments and leaders. You'll see them meeting with each other. And their whole thing is an uprising against the United States of America in our hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. And for whatever reason, they targeted San Francisco, and they announced they were going to have their next major riot. Now, this was just a few weeks ago. They announced it's going to be the week of our crusade, this last week. So the coalition of pastors went to the government authorities and asked them, would they speak to the communist leadership? It's really strange to me how this is happening, but would they speak to them not to have it on that week? The governor went, the mayor went, all the leaders, and they said no. For some reason, the communist leader is free in that nation to move and do what he's doing. I don't comprehend it. But they asked him, and he wouldn't. They refused. Then, the whole group, they went to these leaders, trying to get them to change. And they said, no, we've set the date, and they're moving people and contact people to come and be there and be a part of this particular time in San Francisco. So finally, the key leader of the coalition group of pastors asked for a personal meeting, just a one-on-one with him and the top communist leader in Dominican Republic. And they met. And as they began to talk, communist leader, you know, they were just discussing things and kind of getting to know each other. And he said he was from Santo Domingo. The pastor said, well, I was from Santo Domingo also. And then the guy said, well, I was from this barrio, this particular part of the city, little, you know, like in Tulsa we'd say Brookside or Bigsby or Jinx or something. Dominicans or Santo Domingo, the capital, 1.5 million, 2 million people. So that section of it. And the pastor said, well, I was from that same part of the city. And the guy said, well, I lived just right across from this park, and named the park. And the pastor said, well, I live right across from there also. And then he said, well, I lived in this particular address. And he talked about his son. And the moment he said it, the pastor turned and looked at him and said, I led your son to Jesus Christ. He was in my discipleship group 20-something years ago, and he's a worship leader in the United States of America today. And the communist leader, yeah. And in that moment, they realized they lived next door to each other many years ago. And the communist leader in that moment said, there will be no strike in San Francisco. I guarantee you it is called off at this moment. Yeah, can we give God praise? And he said also, I am going to speak to all of my leaders that are in the country to go to that crusade. What an awesome God. Go ahead and show the video.